Welcome to Keto Meals and Recipes.com. Today's video is both a techniques tutorial on how to butterfly cut a roast and a keto video recipe which I think you'll love because it's very tasty, moist, and extremely easy and budget friendly. This video is about my 3-ingredient stuffed pork loin. And as I said, you'll love it because it has minimal prep time and, as the title implies, uses only 3 ingredients. By the way, if you're only cooking for 1 or 2 people and you think this roast is way too much for you, please watch to the end and I will tell you how and at what point in the roasting process you can separate into individual servings that you can freeze as prep ahead meals. And watch to the end where I will make suggestions for complete meals and show you the macros for the complete meal in order to help make your meal planning a bit easier. And check out the end cards for more easy meal ideas. Now, the macronutrient ratio for this easy 3-ingredient stuffed pork loin is 2:1, with 2.1 grams of total carbs, 0.2 grams of dietary fiber, resulting in 1.9 grams of net carbs per generous serving. As you can see on my table, I am truly only using these 3 ingredients. Today I'm going to be using my store-bought basil pesto. But do let me know in the comments below if you would like me to make Italian-style basil pesto as a video. Now, the first thing I'd like to show you is how to butterfly cut the meat. First, I start with a whole pork loin roast. This is a very inexpensive and lean cut of meat. But on one side, there is a thin layer of fat. There are different ways of butterflying a pork loin roast, but the method I'm going to demonstrate is how I have found that works best for me. I start by having the thin layer of fat facing up. And if you examine the roast, you'll notice that one end is a little bit thicker than the other end. I will begin the butterflying of the roast by making the first cut at the thicker or fatter side. There are people who prefer to start at the other end, but this is how I like to do it. On this fatter side of the meat, make a 1-inch or 2-centimeter cut into the meat and make the cut at a 45-degree angle into the roast. Next, angle your knife so it's parallel to the cutting board or horizontal to the meat. Make a 1-inch or 2.5 centimeter cut along the entire length of the pork loin. Remember to keep this cut horizontal. This is really important. As you make your lengthwise cuts, the pork loin will start to unroll. Repeat by making additional 1-inch or 2.5 centimeter cuts into the pork loin. And keep unrolling the meat as you go. Continue making these lengthwise cuts until you reach the end or the center part of the roast and the entire roast has been butterflied. Do not worry if you see where you made these cuts and the meat is a bit jaggedy. This is actually good. I'll explain this in a moment. When you have finished butterflying your roast end to end, you'll see that the final result is a mostly uniform 1-inch or 2.5 centimeter thick layer of flat meat. However, you should examine the meat for thickness, and if you notice there's a thicker part to any part of the meat, just make a short cut into the thicker portion to even out the thickness. This will also open up the meat a little bit more. Lastly, make shallow diagonal cuts into the inside part of the meat that's facing up, because the irregularities resulting from the butterflying process and these diagonal cuts will create a rougher surface, allow for more surface area for the pesto to flavor the meat. After laying flat your butterfly pork on your cutting board, the next step is to simply apply the stuffing. For this, you will need your good quality basil pesto. As I mentioned, I am using a store-bought pesto because I find store-bought pesto much easier. Not as good as my homemade, but easier. And that's good sometimes. When you're buying a store-bought basil pesto, please always read the ingredient list. Some are amazing and don't have any sugar and other unnecessary ingredients. But I have found that many brands do have sugar and or some sort of starch that you don't want. But if you're using a store-bought basil pesto, make sure you take a little taste in order to decide if this basil pesto is salty enough for you. My basil pesto is just right, but if you like more salt, just sprinkle about 1 teaspoon of salt over the entire inside of the meat and rub it in with your hand. And just spread the basil pesto over the entire surface of the inside part of the butterflied meat. Use the back of the spoon to spread the basil pesto to even out the coverage over the entire surface of the meat, like this. Next, starting at one end, spread the crumbled feta evenly over about 3/4 of the surface, just placing the feta on top of the pesto. This is all you have to do for the stuffing. I'm sure you'll agree this couldn't be easier. Now to roll up, start at the cheese end and roll the meat tightly until you reach the other end, just like you would a sushi roll. And if some of the filling is coming out the side, just press it back into place. To secure your pork loin so that it won't unravel while it's roasting, I'm using longer and thicker cocktail-style toothpicks, which I just weave in and out to secure and bind the cut opening. You could also use baking twine, but I prefer the toothpicks. Okay, having done that, the last thing you do is take a bit of the leftover pesto. I use maybe a teaspoon or so, and rub the pesto on the outer part of the surface. Then transfer the pork loin, fat side up, onto your baking sheet that you've lined with parchment paper. For this recipe, I'm just using the lid. And place this roast into the middle position of your preheated oven, which is set at 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 degrees Celsius, and sear uncovered for 10 to 15 minutes or until the surface has a light golden color. Then, without opening the oven, reduce the heat to 355 degrees Fahrenheit or 180 degrees Celsius and roast for about 1 to 1.5 hours, or until the interior temperature of the pork loin reaches 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius. Please note that the roasting time is variable and will depend how thick your roast is. When your roast is done, remove it from the oven and let the roast rest in the pan for about 15 minutes. This resting time will allow the juices to be reabsorbed by the meat, which will keep the meat juicier and more tender. Then, when you're ready to serve, just cut the pieces into 1.5 inch or 1.8 centimeter sections. With my roast, I got 6 really generous servings. Now, if you like this roast recipe, but an entire roast is way too much for you, you can cut the roast into single serving sections, place them in freezer-safe containers or freezer bags. But please note, if you're freezing a couple pieces together, place a piece of parchment between the 2 servings to separate them. This will make it much easier to separate them as they thaw. And to thaw, transfer the freezer bags with your servings into the refrigerator and allow it to thaw overnight. Then an hour before serving, take them out of the fridge and allow them to get to room temperature. And you can either microwave to reheat or reheat the oven to 355 Fahrenheit or 180 Celsius and heat for a few minutes. But if you prefer heating your prep-ahead servings in the oven, may I suggest you slightly undercook your stuffed pork loin. Take it out of the oven maybe 20 minutes or so before you think it's done. Cut into single serving portions and then return the rest of the roast that you'll be serving that night into the oven to finish. Then store the single servings in a freezer-safe container or plastic bag as I explained earlier. This method is great because when you want the prep-ahead serving, all you have to do is just thaw your meat and place it on a baking sheet in your preheated oven and bake until your meat is done, usually about 15 to 20 minutes. The advantage of this method is that your pork loin will taste as if you just made it fresh that day, rather than having just reheated it. But both methods are really good. Now for a few suggestions for side dishes that nicely complement this 3-ingredient stuffed pork loin. The first one I'd like to suggest is one that we really like, which is the Vietnamese cashew coconut red cabbage coleslaw. The coleslaw goes really well with the stuffed pork. The macronutrient for a single serving of this meal combination are shown here. As you can see, total and net carbs are quite low. Or if you want a lighter tasting salad, you could also combine it with my avocado spinach strawberry salad with balsamic vinaigrette. And the macronutrient for this combination are shown here. We also like to combine the 3-ingredient stuffed pork loin with my grilled zucchini spears. And here are the macros for this combination. If you like the idea of a stuffed pork loin, but want something a little bit different, please check out my bacon wrapped pork loin stuffed with feta and sage. It's also very easy, but has more of a Greek taste to it. I made this recipe a while ago, and my family really liked it because this easy stuffing was very tasty, and because they liked the way that the crispy bacon exterior keeps the pork juicy and enhances the flavor. And they just thought the combination was really good. This is a very easy and tasty recipe, especially if you're a beginner or are looking for something that's easy and quick to prepare. And for other easy to prepare entrees, don't forget to check out the end cards for more ideas. As always, the link for the printable recipe and all mentioned videos are posted in the description below, so check them out. Thank you very much for watching my video. I hope you come back and check out my next video when it's posted.